So I'm a social psychologist, and that means I'm always looking at the effect of people on each other. And so when you ask what is a person, at first I thought, oh, I'm glad she asked that to him because I don't have an answer. But then I realized, so in cultural psychology, there's a lot of research on the self because there are two different sort of modal patterns of selfhood on this planet for our species. The normal one, shared by most people throughout all of history, is called the interdependent sense of self. And it is, you can almost represent with Venn diagrams like, lots of overlapping circles. You exist with other people, for other people. You don't just make up your mind and do something. You have to check with people. You're really tightly linked. And then something happened. People trace it out to certain philosophical developments in ancient Greece. Who knows why? But something developed in Europe and then North America called the independent sense of self, where we think of ourselves almost not like billiard balls, but like I'm a separate circle. And what's in me? Who am I? I have to find who am I? That's my job to figure that out. And then I'm going to go out there in the world, and I might interact with you if there's something in it for me. This independent self is much more prone to loneliness and to a sense of anomie or normlessness because it's not bound in. But I realized, as you were answering the question, I think there's a third kind of self, which has only existed for about 12 years, and that is a phone-based sense of self. Because the way that you develop personhood as a child is you see yourself through the eyes of others. Other people see you as an athlete, so you're an athlete. They see you as beautiful, so you're beautiful. Whatever it is, we don't figure out who we are. It comes out of interaction with real people in our environment, and ideally people who love us and who are there year after year. But what happens to many of you who grew up with a phone-based childhood? If you got a phone, and you had devices before you got your first phone. Now most American kids get it around age 10 or 11, you get your first phone. In Britain, 25% of their 5-year-olds have their own smartphone because it's such a good babysitter, they just routinely give them a smartphone. And if you grow up with a smartphone, first of all, because it tends to take up 8 or 10 hours a day of your day, so you don't really have much else beyond that. And your interactions are not like loving interactions with people who are going to be there next year. It's these fragmented little bits that are coming and going with people you're never going to see again, and a lot of them don't even exist. And so what happens to a self that grows up from the age of 5 interacting in that way? And I think the results are terrible. And that's in part why I think a phone-based self is probably an anxious self, because it's not, you don't have like a full sense of who I am grounded in this community. Also, you're almost always way below average because what you see online, everyone is so beautiful. Everyone's showing the best of their lives. So in so many ways, because of course we're talking about like spirituality, mental health, and technology in this conversation. So I'm just really primed to think about the ways that human development was just completely derailed around 2010 to 2012 when childhood switched over to phone-based.
So my next question is about, can you contrast that phone-based life that you just laid out so eloquently with a play-based life? What does that look like, and how can I get it?
Yeah. So how can I get a play-based life? By playing. So in my book, The Anxious Generation, I always try to take a cultural psychology perspectives, evolutionary psychology, social psychology. And there's a lot of interesting writing and research on play from an evolutionary perspective because all mammals play. Squirrel babies play at things that will help them be better adult squirrels. And we have a puppy, she's 2 years old now, but man, all she wanted to do was like play tug of war with a rope bone and chasing games. So all mammals play, and it's a biological necessity because that's how we wire up our brains. We got these big brains, and they too wire up in interaction with the world, with the three-dimensional physical world. They have to have that, and they need risk-taking. Animals take risks, children take risks if we let them. And that's the way you get healthy brain development, taking small risks. You sometimes get hurt, but you usually don't, and then you learn how to not get hurt. And so that's a play-based childhood. It has to have a lot of play, and that play is best when there's no adult supervisor because then the kids are taking responsibility. Somebody is rough on someone else. Someone says, hey, knock it off. They learn to self-regulate. So that's a play-based childhood. And that's what we had from about 300 million BC until around 2010. And now, I keep hearing stories like, I pushed my kids outside to play, but they didn't know how. Yes. If you don't have experience playing on your own, because the screen is always going to be more interesting than anything else out there. The screen is designed to grab your interest. It's colorful. It's quick moving. So that's why I say the play-based childhood. I mean, it began to end in the 90s. We started locking up kids and not letting them out. We thought they'd be abducted if we ever let them go to the next aisle in a supermarket. I mean, people literally think their kid will be taken from a supermarket or a subway station. Like, really, how are they going to get a screaming kid out of the subway? Like, it doesn't make any sense. But we freaked out about it. And at the same time, as we were sort of cracking down on independence, the internet came in, and it was amazing. And the early internet was spectacular, and the millennials grew up with it, and they're fine. Their mental health is good, they're creative, they're a successful generation. And so we all thought this stuff is good. And then the smartphone comes out, and it's even more amazing. And social media comes out, it's really amazing. And so now kids are growing up from the age of 10 or 11 with a smartphone and social media, and we think this is amazing. It's gonna make them smart. This is gonna be really good, and it wasn't. It was really different from the early internet. And in 2012, it's like someone turned on a switch, and girls all over the developed world started checking into psychiatric emergency wards for self-harm, and suicide rates began to go up a lot, especially for girls. So that's why I focus on this period. 2010 to 2015 was the great rewiring of childhood, when we lost the play-based childhood for good, or for, I should say entirely, but I will come back, and we replaced it with a phone-based childhood. That's the story. That's my story.